Part 5. In His Footsteps. Section 29. The flame spreads to other lands. For many long months, Lua was separated from her beloved master by an ocean. She prayed each day that she might be made worthy to serve him. One day, when she returned home depressed with her lack of accomplishment in the pathway of the cause of God, a letter was awaiting her. It was postmarked Palestine. The moment Lua touched it, she felt an inner prompting towards some great event. It held an exciting assignment from Abdu'l-Bahá. Just as Abdu'l-Bahá had sailed from the east to the west to spread the faith, he now summoned Lua to travel from west to east to do the same thing. He called upon Lua to carry the message of Bahá'u'lláh to India. She obeyed immediately. When her assignment was completed, Lua, to her complete joy, returned not to America but to the Holy Land to be in the presence of the Master. She had successfully accomplished her mission. Whatever Abdu'l-Bahá wanted undertaken, Lua was prompt to volunteer. The Master praised Lua's work in India and wrote to the West of her victories. Because of her ceaseless teaching and travelling, particularly in Europe and America, where she planted the flag of the faith in many hearts, the Master proclaimed her the banner. Lua often sat at that blessed table in the Holy Land. She sat at the feet of the Master and drank in as much as she could from the ocean of his wisdom. Following her teaching victories in India, Lua remained for 7 months in the presence of her beloved Master. On one occasion it is said that the Master told Lua that Baha'u'lláh had chosen her for his work when she was but a little girl on the farm. He also said that in the days to come, her home in Hume, New York, would be a place of pilgrimage, and sometime in the future, thousands would one day journey to that farm in Upper New York where she had once run barefoot as a child. Abdu'l-Bahá showered her with such kindness and love that Lua felt her life had been too richly blessed with happiness. She felt an increasing need of participating in some of the suffering which had been the lot of Abdu'l-Bahá for half a century. His whole life had been a living martyrdom. Within Lua there now grew a great longing to share this martyrdom. After all, she was one of the spiritual descendants of those heroic dawnbreakers of the faith in Persia. More than 20,000 had given their lives and stained the sands of Persia red with blood. Of what value was one small life? Lua's spirit hungered, not to weep away its life in drops, but like a giant skyrocket, to spill its treasures to the night in some great sudden sacrifice that might win new glories for the faith. Lua went to the Master and asked him if he would permit her to become a martyr. The account of her constant pleading is told movingly and amusingly in the diary of Dr. Yunus Khan Afrukhte, a secretary of Abdu'l-Bahá in those days. So eagerly did Lua desire to become a martyr to her faith that she enlisted the help of some of the friends in the Holy Land. Lua could no longer call upon her dear friend Juliet Thompson to plead with the Master, so she used her eloquence and charm to try and influence some of the Persian Baha'is who were with Abdu'l-Bahá to intercede for her. Those who refused to intercede, she asked to pray in the holy shrines that she might be privileged to die for the faith. When Abdu'l-Bahá heard her first request, he laughed with much enjoyment. He looked upon her with much tenderness and love. When Lua persisted in her request, Abdu'l-Bahá became silent and would not answer her. Finally, Lua entreated no more. She wrote to some of her friends in America and spoke laughingly herself of her own intensity at this time. She said, "I made such a nuisance of myself with everyone in my great desire to give my life for the faith that eventually every one of the friends was earnestly praying that I might in truth be granted my request, and the sooner the better." Part 5, Section 30. Following in his footsteps. One of the deepest longings of Lua's life was that someday she might be permitted to follow in the Master's footsteps, even if only for the shortest distance. There is a touching story told in Pilgrim's Notes, although we could not find the original to substantiate it, which tells of the day that Lua was walking with Abdu'l-Bahá and some of the friends on the white sands of the sea near Akká. Lua, it is said, suddenly became aware of the Master's tracks in the soft sand. She was walking a pace or two behind him. Quite spontaneously she stepped behind Abdu'l-Bahá and began to trace his footsteps by placing her shoes one at a time in each of his footprints. Perhaps it is only a fable, as Lua soon became a legend in her own time, and it is difficult to sort fact from fiction, but there is a lesson we all can learn from the story, whatever its origin. Without turning, Abdu'l-Bahá said sharply, "What are you doing?" Lua replied cheerily, "I am following in your footsteps." Abdu'l-Bahá was silent for some time. Then he repeated more forcefully, "Lua, what are you doing?" She said, "I am walking in your footsteps, beloved Master." Without a word, Abdu'l-Bahá strode on. Lua, it is said, felt a chill as she realized the utter futility and presumptuousness of such a weak instrument as herself ever daring to aspire to walk in the footsteps of the mystery of God. Suddenly, Lua felt an agonizing pain in her ankle. She looked down, and she had been stung by a scorpion. She cried out, but the Master did not turn or slow his stride. Lua walked on with the utmost difficulty. Her ankle was swelling rapidly. The pain was becoming intense. But she clenched her teeth and forced herself to continue. When the suffering had become almost unbearable, Abdu'l-Bahá turned and came back. "This," he told her, "is what it means to walk in my footsteps." Abdu'l-Bahá touched her head gently with his hand. Lua's eyes were brimming with tears. She understood the lesson. The Master turned and continued on his way, Lua limping after him as best she could. She felt the pain gradually diminishing as she tried to keep up with her beloved Master. It was at this time that one of the Baha'is staying in the Holy Land told Lua the story of a youthful Baha'i named Abdu'l-Wahhab. He too had longed earnestly to walk in the footsteps of his beloved. About this story there could be no doubt, for it was verified by the pen of Bahá'u'lláh himself. Lua listened with enraptured interest. Abdu'l-Wahhab was from Shiraz. When he was living in Kazimine, his love for Bahá'u'lláh became so overpowering that he left home and followed Bahá'u'lláh to Tehran. He longed to be in Bahá'u'llah's presence once more. Abdu'l-Wahhab yearned to walk in the footsteps of his beloved. Before Abdu'l-Wahhab arrived in Tehran, Bahá'u'lláh had been seized and arrested. Although history proved him to be innocent of any wrongdoing, Bahá'u'lláh was paraded bareheaded, barefooted, and in chains for miles under the blazing sun. His hat was knocked off and his garments stripped from his body. He was stoned along the route. He was beaten by the mounted guards who escorted him to prison. Finally, they cast him into a black, sunless pit underground. There he was chained to the floor. His feet were put in stocks. His shoulders were weighed down by a huge, heavy 100-pound chain, which tore his flesh and scarred him for life. When Abdu'l-Bahá arrived in Tehran searching for Bahá'u'lláh, he too was arrested as a follower of this new religion. He was thrown into prison. Abdu'l-Bahá was heartbroken. His prayers had not been answered. Now he would remain a prisoner or, who knows, perhaps be slain as an innocent victim of prejudice, never again to look upon the face of Bahá'u'lláh. Abdu'l-Bahá feared that his longing to walk in the footsteps of that blessed beauty would never be realized. Surely God had forsaken him. Abdu'l-Bahá was shoved down the stone steps of the Black Pit prison into that impenetrable darkness. He was chained to the other prisoners. When Abdu'l-Bahá's eyes gradually became accustomed to the darkness, he turned to look at the prisoner beside him. He looked into the eyes of Bahá'u'lláh. He was chained to his beloved, and that terrible dungeon with its awful stench of accumulating filth, its vermin, chains and threat of death, became a fragrant paradise. Bahá'u'lláh himself wrote of those hours spent with Abdu'l-Bahá in the Qurratu'l prison. Every day our jailers, entering our cell, would call the name of one of our companions, bidding him arise and follow them to the foot of the gallows. We were awakened one night, ere break of day, by Abdu'l-Bahá, who was bound with us to the same chains. He asked us whether we were awake and proceeded to relate to us his dream. "I have this night," he said, "been soaring into a space of infinite vastness and beauty. I seemed to be uplifted on wings that carried me wherever I desired to go. A feeling of rapturous delight filled my soul. I flew in the midst of that immensity with a swiftness and ease that I cannot describe." Bahá'u'lláh looked with love upon Abdu'l-Bahá. He said to him, "Today it will be your turn to sacrifice yourself for this cause. May you remain firm and steadfast to the end. You will then find yourself soaring in that same limitless space of which you dreamed, traversing with the same ease and swiftness the realm of immortal sovereignty, and gazing with that same rapture upon the infinite horizon." Bahá'u'llah's words came true. That morning, when the door was opened to let a shaft of sunlight down into the deep black pit, the jailer made his way down the steps and called out a name. "Abdu'l-Bahá!" Bahá'u'lláh wrote of Abdu'l-Bahā's joy when he heard that fateful name called out and was freed of his chains. Bahá'u'lláh said, "Throwing off his chains, he sprang to his feet, embraced each of his fellow prisoners, and taking us into his arms, pressed us lovingly to his heart. That moment we discovered that he had no shoes to wear. We gave him our own, and speaking a last word of encouragement and cheer, sent him forth to the scene of his martyrdom. Later on, his executioner came to us, praising in glowing language the spirit which that youth had shown. Abdu'l-Bahá had not only fulfilled his longing to walk in Bahá'u'llah's footsteps, to share his suffering, Abdu'l-Bahá had walked to his death in Bahá'u'llah's very shoes. He had given up friends, fame, wealth, family, and finally life itself. This, the Persian Baha'is told Lua, is what it means to walk in the footsteps of your beloved. To Lua, such a sacrifice was not a deterrent, it was a spur. The taste of affliction was as sweet as honey. She longed to share the countless agonies of Bahá'u'lláh and her beloved master. Instead of quenching her fire, the story of Abdu'l-Bahá poured oil on the flames. After all, she was a spiritual descendant of that illustrious dawnbreaker. If martyrdom was good enough for him, it was good enough for Lua. Lua hoped that someday, somewhere, if only in the tiniest measure, her tribulations would, as Bahá'u'lláh has said of his own suffering, help lift the yoke of tyranny from off the necks of men.